What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about some sell-high players after week 3 of the fantasy football season. So I think these are just players that maybe overachieved in week 3. I'm not super high on these guys long-term, so I think it's probably better to get off of them now, get a nice return before maybe they come back down to earth. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe. Any questions, drop them down below, and I'll make sure to get back to every single person. But my first sell high player, we're going to start off here at the wide receiver position, and it's going to be Amari Cooper. He had a monster week 3, 12 targets, 7 for 86, and 2 touchdowns. He was really due for a big game after just a rough start. Regardless of how bad the offense was, like Cooper's talented enough where he's still going to have some decent games. He had 5 receptions for 27 yards combined in the first 2 games. And I just think at this point, Amari Cooper has been good enough in previous seasons. He has the name value. He was a fairly high drafted wide receiver where I feel like you can get a pretty solid return for him here. Even though he's had 2 clunkers, I think you can capitalize on this one big game here. And it really just comes down to the fact that I do not want to be invested in this Browns offense. Deshaun Watson has attempted 37, 34, and 45 pass attempts and has yet to hit 200 passing yards in a game this season. He has 3 passing touchdowns through 3 weeks. The offensive line is banged up. It's got even more banged up, moving forward. And so could Amari Cooper be a fantasy wide receiver 3 rest of season if he has a few big games, hits in the touchdown department? Sure, he could be a top 36 guy, but with Deshaun Watson at the quarterback position, it's tough to see upside farther than that. And if I could trade someone who's valued as a fringe top 24 option, I want that player to, actually have top 24 upside. Unless Jameis Winston takes over, I just don't see it. So here are some names of guys that maybe I'd look to flip. I think T. Higgins, if you can get him before this Bengals game, he would be an awesome guy. Brian Thomas Jr., if you can make the trade before Monday night. I think J-Mo coming off a down game would also be a fun target. So those are just 3 initial names I'd be throwing out there to get back in exchange for Amari Cooper. Now for my second sell high, we're going to stick around at the wide receiver position. Another veteran here, it is going to be DeAndre Hopkins. And he had a very impressive week 3, went 6 for 73 and a touchdown. What was kind of crazy about this game is that he still only had a 50% route participation. He's still kind of working his way back from his preseason injury. So he's not even back to a full workload here, but he delivered a very solid fantasy day. Like I said, 6 for 73 and a touchdown. And this is honestly a pretty similar argument to why I talked about Calvin Ridley as a sell high last week. Hopefully you're able to get off of him before week 3, kind of laid a clunker this week. I just do not want to be reliant on Will Levis here with D-Hop or with Calvin Ridley. The Titans have put up 14, 17, and 17 points in the first 3 weeks, so they have yet to hit 20 points. This is a bad passing attack that has 2 legit pass catchers with DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley. I think both these guys, they could have big games. We saw Calvin Ridley week 2, D-Hop here in week 3, but they're going to have very, very low weekly floors like we saw with Calvin Ridley here coming off a clunker. And I feel like the peak outcome here for D-Hop is a fantasy wide receiver 3. Similar to Cooper, he has the name value coming off a big game. I do think this is a prime opportunity to pivot. So these are some of the potential targets I'd be looking at. Tank Dell, I think would be a nice option. Competing with some other top wide receivers, but is at least in a better passing attack. JSN coming off a down game. Deontay Johnson, you could, make the pitch, both guys coming off of boom games. Maybe someone likes Hopkins more than Deontay. And then Jaden Reed, another guy who I think could be the Packers wide receiver 1, has just had a couple of down games due to a quarterback injury. But I really would be trying to get off of D-Hop here. I would not be shocked if you don't trust him in your lineup rest of season. And if you can get a solid wide receiver 3 with top 24 upside, in exchange for D-Hop, I would like to do that. Now, shifting over to the tight end position, I want to talk about Dallas Goedert here because he went out and had an absolutely monster week 3 performance, was targeted 11 times, caught 10 of them for 170 yards. And with how terrible tight ends have been to start off this season, I would not be shocked to see someone just go out, make a massive overreaction to Dallas Goedert's big game, and really just break the bank to get him. Because I could see people, whether they drafted a highly touted guy like a Travis Kelce, a Sam Laporta, a Mark Andrews, or if they punted the position and they're just dealing with terrible streaming options, I could see someone just wanting to lock down that tight end position. They think Dallas Goedert is going to be a top option moving forward. but I just feel like we have 6 full seasons of data that tells us that Dallas Goedert is not a high upside guy. He had one high upside week, but over an entire season, 6 full seasons into his NFL career, he has never had that crazy high ceiling. He has never hit 12 PPR points per game. If you started him, he might have won you this week pretty much by himself. But if you can flip him for like a Brock Bowers coming off a down game, I like Kyle Pitts more. Ferguson's coming off a nice game, but I still like Jake Ferguson more than him. I would. Like I said, it was a huge game. Year after year, he's never been the super high upside play. I don't see why that's going to change here. It's not like he was super impressive week 1 or week 2 either. It was 2 clunkers, then this massive performance. I think he's a nice sell high candidate. And then the final player here, in my opinion, this is like the dream sell high opportunity. It's going to be Chuba Hubbard. And he is coming off a monster game, 21 carries, 114 rushing yards. So solid usage on the ground, was very efficient, also caught 5 passes for 55 yards and a touchdown. And I think, the Andy Dalton, great performance, Panthers offensive explosion, that's great news for Chuba in week 4. But for the rest of the season, I think it's even better news for Jonathan Brooks. I think once Jonathan Brooks is healthy, it could be heading into week 5. I have a very hard time seeing how he doesn't take over this backfield. He's a talented prospect. The Panthers spent a round 2 pick on him. So even if you want to make the argument that this is some sort of a committee, I still think at that point, Chuba Hubbard is pretty much useless, right? Because if you have a committee on this Panthers offense, they're not going to have the production every week that they did here in week 3. So we did see Chuba dominate the touches in week 3, but Miles Sanders was still somewhat involved. He was part of this backfield. He ran more routes than Chuba. He got a goal line opportunity, which led to a goal line touchdown. So maybe like Dave Canales really likes Miles Sanders, and that's why he's working him in here. But if he thinks Chuba Hubbard should be in like somewhat of a split here with Miles Sanders, I don't think he's viewing Chuba Hubbard as a world beater. I think if he loved Chuba Hubbard heading into the season, he would not have drafted Jonathan Brooks. I think he wants Jonathan Brooks to be the guy. So if you can, sell Chuba Hubbard for a longer term option, I think that's a great play, because I really would not be shocked if from week 5 on, he's pretty much unplayable if Jonathan Brooks is back. If you can, include Chuba in a deal that gets Jonathan Brooks in return, I would love that. I talked about Jonathan Brooks as a buy low option. I think if you can maybe get a guy like Zach Moss, that might be stretching it, but he was coming off a bad week 2. I think he's going to have solid usage here Monday night. So if you can get that deal done before Zach Moss plays and hopefully plays well, I'd even take a guy like Bucky Irving. That might be controversial because we just saw Chuba have this huge game. Bucky Irving is currently slotted in as the running back 2. But when we want to talk about these guys' long-term trajectories, I think Chuba, he had a bad week 1, bad week 2, monster week 3 because Andy Dalton played well. He's probably going to have a pretty decent week 4. But once we're getting into week 5, week 6, week 7, when Jonathan Brooks is back and playing, I just don't think he's going to be fantasy relevant. You look at a guy like Bucky Irving, didn't do a ton week 1, week 2, decent week 3, efficient on the ground. I think him and Rachaad White could kind of, have their usage come closer together. Maybe Bucky Irving just straight up takes over that backfield. So those are some names I'd be looking, to maybe bring in for a guy like Chuba Hubbard. But I do think if people aren't super high on Jonathan Brooks, they're not super familiar with him, then maybe they view Chuba Hubbard as like a super long-term play. Personally, I just do not. So that is going to wrap it up for my 4 sell highs here. Some wide receivers, Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, also have a tight end in there with Dallas Goedert, and then wrapping it up here with Chuba Hubbard. But thank you all for stopping by. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.